let's do this. All right, this is kind of a new location. Let's try that again. All right, so this is kind of a new location. This is not in my room and this is not in my front yard. I really wanted to go somewhere special to record this video because I feel like this video has a special message. And I thought, what better place to go to than just a park I live near. So this video is called Monday Night Football. And I have to let you know, this is not about the upcoming NFL season, or this is not about any sort of like trades or anything like that. This has nothing to do with football. So if you clicked on this video thinking that this was like a football vlog, I'm so sorry, but we're not going to be talking about like the Buffalo Bills. Go Bills. Anyway, this video is actually more centered on my own personal journey of overcoming personal shame and being a queer person and being a trans person. And the reason why it's called Monday Night Football, I promise you I will get into, but it's part of one of the stories. So let's just sort of dive right into this topic. So first things first, it's June, right? Happy Pride Month. Like, you know, these things keep coming and every time they come, it's like, all right, we're here. And, you certainly feel a type of way because on the one hand you want to celebrate, on the other hand you're like, well, what is there to celebrate? But I promise you there is, and I hope that this video has like a positive sort of uplifting message that can help you sort of get into your pride feelings and festivities. I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but it's Pride. Happy June. I'm also recording this on the 10th anniversary of the Pulse nightclub massacre, and I would feel like an idiot if I didn't mention that right now because that event sort of plays into this video too. But just to reiterate the point, this video is about my lifelong journey of overcoming shame with being queer and being a trans person. So what inspired this video? I'll go into it. So I listen to this podcast right now. It's still being made, I believe, but it's like 14 seasons long and it's called Making Gay History and it's hosted by Eric Marcus. And it is just the most fantastic podcast you've ever heard in your life because it's interviews and it's testimony from just a whole range of queer people, gay, lesbian, trans, all over the acronym basically. And what's so nice about it is that a lot of these interviews were taking place in the 80s and 90s. So there are voices that you can no longer really hear, or voices I didn't even know I could hear to begin with, being interviewed by Eric Marcus for a book he was writing at the time. So you got voices like Sylvia Rivera and like Marsha P. Johnson speaking. And they're just, you know, they're people that you've always seen pictures of in black and white, but you've never really heard them speak. So to hear them speak in their own words, it really is powerful because you realize how similar you are to them in many ways and that you can sort of contextualize their existence and what they did in the time in which they were alive. And it's a very, very just amazing podcast. Please go listen. You have to listen to this, especially in June, because I think in June, if you're going to celebrate Pride, you definitely need to reflect on the history of what Pride is all about, because it's not just about Capital One sponsoring a march in downtown Los Angeles. So now I'll actually get to the point that I'm trying to make here. It's that Eric Marcus actually interviews Ellen DeGeneres of all people, and I know what you're thinking, like Ellen, like what does she have to say? You know, she's a rich gay, right? But there was a time actually in Ellen's life when she was in very different circumstances where her show, much like today, was canceled, but it was canceled for a much different reason. It wasn't canceled because of her behavior and how she treated her workers. It had to do with the fact that she had a sitcom, and in the sitcom, her character came out as a lesbian woman, and also she coincidentally or incidentally came out at the same time as a lesbian woman. It was this thing that she wanted to do. She wanted to take the weight off of her shoulders because she was like at the top of like the American sitcom, you know, world, and she wanted to share like, oh, by the way, I'm lesbian. So it was something that she did that was actually met with praise, but also specific backlash. And the backlash unfortunately resulted in her losing her sitcom on ABC. You know, the Disney executives basically just canned it because at the time, just audiences and executives didn't really know how to treat it and handle it. And you should really listen to that interview. I'm not really a big Ellen fan, especially after you find out what she's done in the last few years. However, this interview is very important to me because in this interview, Eric Marcus asks Ellen a very important question that I actually laughed at first, but I realized, oh my gosh, this is going to be the premise of an entire video I'm going to do. And this question that Eric Marcus asked her is, when did you first learn what gay was? And I remember hearing that and thinking like, what do you mean, when did you first learn what gay was? That's such a silly question, but then it hit me. It's like, no, there really was a time when we all kind of had to learn. And some people had the benefit of learning in a positive way, and some of us learned in a more kind of negative way. And I realized that there is an entire video that I can make around this, and I realized that I wanted to center it around the concept of learning shame and unlearning shame, because Ellen went into that with her answer. So now I'm going to make this less about Ellen and more about what I'm trying to say here. So when I heard Eric ask her that question, I was so perplexed. I'm like, what do you mean learning what gay was for the first time? What a silly question. But then I asked myself, well, when did I learn? And then 3 words popped into my head. The words Monday Night Football. And it's so funny because you would think, like, what does football have to do with any of this? And I can actually explain perfectly well. It's part of my story. But it made me realize that in learning about what gay was, I learned that there was a lot of shame attached to it initially, and that shame was completely learned, and I had to go through 27 years of my life to unlearn it. So I'm really just going to dive into that right now. I also want to mention, like, the process of, like, unlearning the shame is essential to my own survival, if that can make sense. So it wasn't something that I just like, hey, I'm gonna unlearn how to be shameful today. It's like, no, I'm gonna do this because I need to live. So this video is really about that process. So let's actually start with why this video is called Monday Night Football. I feel like I'm talking in circles. I'm so sorry. This video is called Monday Night Football because when I was like 7 years old, I went to an Applebee's with my dad for dinner, and we loved going to this place because, you know, my mom would be busy that night and we couldn't cook, and especially my dad couldn't cook, so we'd go to Applebee's and we'd get, like, you know, happy hour food. Like, it was such a big deal for like 7-year-old me to get like a burger or like a pasta, you know what I mean? And when we were there on a Monday night, and this Applebee's had a bar right in the middle of it, and they were showing NFL football games. It was Monday Night Football. And there were 2 women sitting next to each other in complete broad view of me and my dad. And somewhere along the night, these women started kissing each other. And I remember thinking, like, oh, the women are kissing each other? I have never seen that in my life. And my dad didn't really know how to handle it or how to address it with me. And I don't remember him, you know, saying anything about it being particularly shameful. But for a lot of time in my life since then, maybe until my teen years, anything that was presented in media or in Life is Gay, my dad and I would look at each other and would say, like, oh, Monday Night Football. It was a little code phrase we had. And of course, I couldn't have recognized it at the time, but I realize now as an adult that saying Monday Night Football whenever there's something gay, it attached a harmful stigma. It was like, oh, look, it's something I can't understand and I don't want to understand, and it freaks me out. You know what I mean? And I had to learn that it had to freak me out, if that makes sense. Because when I first saw it, I was interested. I was like, what's going on here? This is different. I've never seen this before. But the term Monday Night Football was just a way to sort of minimize of like, hey, it's just this weird thing and you're never going to get it. So, and I want to say that, like, I now realize that my dad just couldn't explain it to me at 7 years old, because not many parents, especially straight ones, have the language or the capacity to explain that to their children. So I don't think it was his goal to, like, teach me this sort of shame. I just think that he was really lost and confused about it. And that's a crazy thing for me to say at 27, because if you asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said some really nasty things about how my dad handled that. But now I know that, like, what could he have possibly done? You know, he's a straight guy. He's been a straight guy his whole life. Like, what's he gonna do? You know what I mean? And I want to say too that, like, growing up, my dad wasn't like this massive raging, you know, homophobe. He just didn't have the language or the experience to address it with me in a way that would make me understand it in a way that didn't have any sort of stigma attached to it. You know, I vividly remember being a kid and my dad telling me, like, hey, if you turn out gay, it's gonna be fine. That was a nice thing to hear as like a teenager, because that was the first and only time that I recall him saying something like that. So that was really nice. But that's what Monday Night Football is about. That's just one experience where I sort of had this sort of shame ingrained into me. The other experience, and I've talked about this in a video before, but I don't mind bringing it up again, was growing up we would go on lots of trips to Las Vegas. And the reason we would do that is not because, you know, we were like trying to hit the slots. It was because my family is really into fishing. And what's near Las Vegas? Lake Mead. And we had a bass boat, and we would always go there. My brother and my dad would fish, and then my mom and I would just go swimming in the lake. It was so much fun. I really miss that, and we don't do that anymore because we're all grown up and we don't have time to really do that. But we were spending a lot of time in Las Vegas, and we would stay in hotels in Las Vegas. You know, we wouldn't stay at like Caesar's Palace, but we would stay at, like, you know, the Excalibur or something fun like that. You know, that was crazy going to the Excalibur as a little kid. But basically, it just so happened that, like, you know, at one period of my life, on a trip there, we were staying in a hotel room that had like the entertainment guides, and back then, I don't know if they print them anymore, it's probably more digital, of course, because you have social media, but they had like printed entertainment guides, and one of the things in that entertainment guide was a advertisement for a drag show on the Strip. And I found this in the bathroom. I was in there alone at night, and I, you know, wanted to just see what was going on. Like, what are the adults doing in Las Vegas? Because I was always told, like, you're a kid, there's not much you can do here except for go to Lake Mead and go to the Hard Rock Cafe and, like, you know, look at Angus Young's guitar or something, right? And I look through this entertainment guide and I thumb through it and I find the drag queens, and I'm immediately like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, I could tell what was going on. You know what I mean? Like, you just sort of know what you're looking at, and what you know is really neat. And one of them did like a very feminine pose in the photo. And I remember seeing that, and it's like, I can do that, you know? Which is like kind of the equivalent to like when a gay guy sees RuPaul, the Drag Race show, and it's like, oh, I can do that so much better than, you know, Kennedy Davenport, when like none of us can dance as well as Kennedy Davenport, right? But it was my way of doing that. I'm like, I can make that pose. So I go in front of the mirror and I kind of just do like a thing like this, and I look in the mirror at myself, and first of all, it felt fabulous, but I remember looking in the mirror and seeing the reflection. The door was kind of creaked open, and my dad was watching me, and he didn't say anything negative, but the fact that I was being watched by him, I immediately realized, like, oh yeah, I shouldn't be doing this. This is bad. This is weird. And so nothing was even said to me. I just knew that because I was being watched, I had once again internalized this part of me as shame, this thing that I was interested in, this thing that I was starting to figure out, like, oh, that's actually just me. So I interpreted it as shame, ultimately. And then lastly, I have a story, and I love telling this story because this story was like, this was like a serious, this was a big moment in my life where, okay, I love telling this story, sorry. Picture this, it's like New Year's Eve 2009, and like I'm with my family, and we're with a bunch of other families at this big house. My brother played on a club water polo team, and you know, at the time I was not his sister, I was his little brother. And he always had to drag his dorky little brother around and hanging out with the water polo teammates. And they're 2 or 3 years older than me. So I'm like 8 years old, 9 years old, and these guys are like 11 and 12. You know, they're talking about like things I have no idea. Like, I remember being a kid and I'm like, what's a condom? You know what I mean? And getting made fun of for that. But we had a New Year's Eve gathering, which we did every year. And in this gathering, you know, in this mansion, basically, there was this like man cave, which was like a pool table, TVs, a bar. And I was sitting there with my brother because I didn't really want to sit with my parents. You know, I wanted to hang out with the guys, you know. And we're watching TV, and a Hooters commercial comes on. You know, we're waiting for it to hit midnight, so there's commercials, and the Hooters commercial comes on, and it's these women who are wearing very revealing clothes, and obviously it's Hooters. You know, you don't go there for the food. But I didn't understand that because during the Hooters commercial, I heard all the guys, including my brother, like, oh wow, she's so hot, this, you know, just 12-year-old boy speaking about adult women and their revealing clothes. And I remember the commercial ends and there's this dead quiet, and I want to add into it, and all I say is like, you know, those chicken wings look so delicious. And they just look at me and they're like, what is wrong with you? And of course I get called like every homophobic slur under the sun. And I remember like it being terrifying, but I remember laughing in my head because like I think I was around 9 or 10, and I remember thinking, it's like, yeah, you're gay. Like, if you're watching this and you're seeing, you know, the Hooters ladies and you're thinking about the food, it's like you're fruity, you know what I mean? And it was a clarifying moment for me, which at the time I had to act like I was scared, but in that moment it just kind of hit me where it's like, okay, I kind of know my place in this world now, because I was more concerned about the chicken wings than the barely clothed women on the screen. So it was just, I love that memory, because that was just like, that's like out of a movie, is it not? Like, just the quietness, it's like, yeah, those chicken wings look delicious. Like, could you imagine? That's my life, right? But those 3 experiences, Monday Night Football, the mirror, you know, the drag pose, the Hooters commercial, those were moments when I expressed myself, or sort of saw myself, or sort of felt who I am. And there was a stigma and a shame attached to it. And I'm smiling about it now because I love that Hooters story so much. I wish I could do a whole video on that sometimes. But those were the times when I had to learn the shame, when I internalized the shame. And it made it so much harder to like come to terms with who I am. And now this is the better parts of the video where I unlearn the shame, because thankfully there has been a process where I've had to unlearn the shame. And I want to mention again that this unlearning process does not have to do with me deciding, hey, I want to do this. It was, I need to survive in this world. So I did. So let's get into the first part about how I had unlearned the shame. So I'm 19 years old, I'm in college, I'm going to a private university, and my professor, I'll never forget his name, he was such a sweet guy, his name was Morgan Sandler. He had an intro to cinema class, and I was a film student, and I had to take this class, you know, at the very beginning. It's just a film studies class. You watch movies and you talk about them. Like, that's heaven if you ask me, right? But in this class, we watched the movie Milk. And if you don't know what Milk is about, it is the autobiographical drama of the life and times of Harvey Milk, which was the gay board of supervisors member in San Francisco who was, you know, he did a lot of things in like an 11-month span that helped improve the lives of queer San Franciscans, but was also, you know, ultimately murdered by Dan White with George Moscone. And this movie presented to me for the first time ever this dramatic sort of retelling of queer history. And I was finally able to connect, like, oh my gosh, there's a history behind this. And the biggest thing I took away from that, and I still take away from that, was that Harvey Milk and a bunch of other gay and lesbian and trans activists fought against the Briggs Initiative, which was Proposition 6 in California. And this was an idea promoted by State Senator Briggs at the time, which would allow public schools to fire gay and lesbian teachers. And the reason why I'm laughing about that is not because it's funny, but it's like, I'm a trans woman and I work in public education. This directly affects me, you know what I mean? And to see that in 1978, Harvey and a bunch of activists rallied around and were able to drum up enough popular support to defeat an anti-gay measure in 1978 in California, because California wasn't as blue as you think it is, or at least it was back then. The fact that they were able to do that in 78, I felt this dramatic sense of pride, right? Pride, there's that word. And this movie sort of made me realize that there has been this long struggle for queer and gay rights, and there's been victories even in places when you didn't think that there would be victories. But seeing how the Briggs Initiative was defeated, it put into context the importance of the Obergefell versus Hodges decision, which was made a few years prior. That was the Supreme Court saying that, you know, federal gay marriage, go for it, you know? And I remember when that happened, I was very happy, but I just couldn't understand, wait, this wasn't already a thing? Because I was very sheltered and I didn't understand, and I didn't want to understand because I wanted to remain closeted in those days when that happened. This helped bridge the gap that there has always been a civil rights struggle for gay and queer rights. And it was because of that movie, and it's because Sean Penn decided I'm going to be a gay man, you know? But that movie made me realize that the fight for queer rights was always ongoing and always going to be a struggle, and there was always going to be, as much as there were going to be defeats, there was also going to be victories. So, in the fall of that year, 2019, I came out as gay to my parents. And then eventually, you know, down the line, when it was time, I came out to them as trans. That was about 4 or 5 years later. 4 years later. I should know this, it was very recent. Anyways. That movie taught me that there were people fighting, actually fighting for people like me, and like it wasn't this thing you had to feel super ashamed about. I hope that makes sense. And then the last story I want to share, and this was really what, this is the defining moment of unlearning the shame, was when I came out at work last August. As I've stated in like this video and in a video previously, I work in public education and I'm a trans woman, and basically I had to come out at some point. But here's the thing, I waited 3 years to do it. I waited 3 years of my life to finally tell someone I hit it. And when you're on, you know, hormone replacement and you're socially transitioning, but you're not doing it at work, it presents a very serious challenge. And in August of last year, I was legally changing my name and all the different federal and state documents, and I realized, yeah, I've got to do this. One problem though, I teach in public education, and I teach in a very conservative part of the state that I live in. A very notably conservative part, so it was terrifying. And I would always tell people in my life, I'm never coming out of this district, I'll just find another job. But I don't know about you, but finding a job right now is really hard, so I decided it would be more worth it for me to come out in my environment than to go and look for a job, basically. When I came out, the experience was overwhelmingly positive. Faculty, admin, school administration, Even parents and students supported me instantly. There was some online backlash, but I don't like to focus too much on that, as terrifying as it was, because there were more people that were like, hey, we just want you to be happy. And I was finally out in every aspect of my life, because I'd also come out to my extended family, which is humongous, by the way. And when I finally hit that moment, I realized there's nothing to be ashamed about. More people have your back than are against you. And that isn't the case for everybody. I'm not going to be, naive and say like, hey, everything's fine, come out. Like, it's still an ongoing thing. I'm not stupid. And that brings me to today. Yesterday was my last day at the school year. I'm still working there, by the way. I'd survived, and I use the word survive, a full year since coming out of my job as a public school teacher, or teacher in public education. And I want to say that I've unlearned a lot of that shame that I learned. And it's a very powerful thing. And it's a very important and necessary thing that a lot of us need to do in order to survive. It's not because I just decided to do it one day. It's because I wanted to live. So, I hope this video wraps up things. If I hadn't mentioned it earlier, happy Pride Month. And today's the 10th anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. And as much as it's fun to, bring up Briggs and Obergefell, we also have to acknowledge that. But I think that there's hope. And I think that, social progress is like this sort of pendulum, and it's swinging in a direction right now. It definitely is, but it'll swing back in our direction, and it's going to swing back hard. If you think it's swinging back hard for them right now, it's going to swing back harder for us. So just have faith and have hope in these sort of things. I think that's all that I want to say in this video. Thank you for watching.